Ask most people how someone gets rich starting from nothing, and you will hear the same three answers: a big salary, a lucky investment, or wealthy parents. Every one of those answers is wrong. The people who actually build wealth from the bottom tend to earn ordinary money, drive ordinary cars, and live on ordinary streets, which is exactly why you never notice them. What separates them is invisible. It runs entirely in the mind, and it shows up decades before the first real dollar does. Once you understand the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. The pattern has a name, even if nobody teaches it. Researchers who study wealth keep colliding with the same uncomfortable finding. The largest survey of millionaires ever conducted looked at more than 10,000 of them, and 79% had received no inheritance at all. None. Not a house, not a check, not a head start. 8 out of 10 of them grew up in families sitting at or below the middle of the income scale, and only 2% came from money. These are not people who won some genetic lottery. They are cafeteria managers and mechanical engineers and high school teachers who quietly crossed a line most people assume is reserved for somebody else. And there is one detail buried in that data that should stop you cold. 1 out of every 3 of those millionaires never earned 6 figures in a single working year of their entire lives. Not once. So if the wealth did not come from a big income, and it did not come from family money, then it came from somewhere else entirely. It came from the way these people think. Today, we are going to walk through the actual mental machinery behind it, the 7 psychological patterns that show up again and again in people who build something out of nothing. By the end, you will know exactly which ones you already run and which ones you have been missing your whole life. Start with the one that changes everything, because without it, none of the others matter. People who build wealth from nothing run on a different clock. When most of us think about money, we think in weeks. The paycheck lands, the bills go out, and whatever survives until the next paycheck is what we call our finances. The wealth builder is thinking in decades, while everyone around them thinks in days. That single shift from the week to the decade is the entire difference between a lifetime of running in place and a lifetime of quietly getting ahead. Let me show you why the clock matters so much, because this is not a mindset slogan. It is arithmetic. Imagine someone who sets aside $300 a month. That is roughly $10 a day, about the cost of a lunch out. If they earn the stock market's long-run historical average of around 10% a year, and they simply keep going for 40 years, that $300 a month becomes about $1.9 million. Read that number again. A lunch a day turned into nearly $2 million, and out of that entire fortune, only $144,000 ever came out of their own pocket. The market itself produced everything else. Now here comes the part that truly separates the wealthy mind from everyone else. Take that same person and have them wait just 10 years before they begin. Same $300 a month, same 10%, but 30 years of growth instead of 40. Instead of nearly $2 million, they finish with about $678,000. Waiting a single decade cost them more than $1.2 million. And the early starter only put in about $36,000 more than the person who waited. That is the price the world quietly charges for hesitation, and almost nobody ever feels it happening, because it happens in the future, where the present-day brain does not want to look. People who build wealth from nothing have trained themselves to look anyway. They can feel the weight of a decade the way you feel the weight of a bill that is due tomorrow. So when they are handed a choice between a small pleasure now and a much larger reward later, they do not experience it as deprivation. They experience it as trading a small thing for a large one, which is not a sacrifice at all. It only looks like a sacrifice to a brain stuck living inside the week. The second pattern is where the surface of your own life starts to lie to you. We are trained from childhood to read wealth off the outside of a person. The car, the watch, the neighborhood, the shoes. But the people quietly building real wealth have almost completely unhooked their sense of self from anything other people can see. There is a woman I want you to keep in mind as we go. Call her Tessa. Tessa drives a used sedan with more than 100,000 miles on it, and her phone is 2 models old. If you passed her at the gas station, you would never look twice. Tessa also has more than $800,000 invested, built patiently on an income that never once crossed $90,000 a year. Tessa is not depriving herself of anything she actually wants. She simply stopped buying things to prove something to strangers she will never see again. This trait stares right back at you from the survey data. The millionaires in that study were not, for the most part, living corner office executive lives. Only 15% of them held senior leadership or executive titles. Most were on ordinary streets in ordinary homes, which is the whole reason the myth survives in the first place. You cannot see the wealthy person who looks exactly like everyone else. The person draining their account to look rich is loud and visible. The person actually getting rich is invisible on purpose, and that invisibility is not an accident. It is the strategy working exactly as designed. Consider Coretta. She taught 4th grade for more than 30 years and never earned much above $70,000 in any of them. Nothing about her life ever looked wealthy from the outside. Yet in that same enormous study of millionaires, one result genuinely shocked the people who ran it. Teachers ranked 3rd among all the careers that produced the most millionaires, sitting above both doctors and lawyers. That one is worth sitting with for a moment. People on a modest public school salary quietly outbuilt some of the highest paid professionals in the entire country. Coretta got there the same way every one of them did, by living well beneath what she earned and letting the decades carry the rest. She was never once trying to look rich. She was only ever trying to be free, and there is an ocean of difference between those two things. The mental move underneath this is subtle but enormous. Most people spend money to purchase an identity. The new truck says something about who they believe they are. The wealth builder has quietly decided their identity is simply not for sale in a showroom. Their self-worth is anchored to something the neighbors cannot see, and because it is anchored somewhere invisible, the pressure to spend loses its grip on them. When who you are stops depending on what you own, an entire category of spending just evaporates on its own. Which brings us to the third pattern, and it might be the most valuable of them all. Because this is where most people who start the journey actually lose it. It is rarely the market that wrecks the average investor. It is their own nervous system. Something surprises almost everyone who looks closely at how the market really behaves. Over the long run, it has averaged about 10% a year, but it almost never delivers 10% in any single year. It lurches. During the financial crisis around 2008, the market fell by roughly half. In the dot-com collapse a few years before that, it fell by nearly half again. The people who ended up wealthy lived through every one of those crashes. The difference was what they did while it was happening. They did nothing. They kept buying. The average investor does the exact opposite. When the market drops and the headlines start screaming, fear grabs the wheel and they sell near the bottom just to make the pain stop. Then, once things feel safe again and prices have already climbed back, they buy in near the top. Buy high, sell low, over and over, driven entirely by feeling. That one behavior, panic in the valleys and greed at the peaks, has quietly destroyed more wealth than any crash in history ever has. Think for a moment about what just one of those panic decisions actually costs. Someone who sold everything at the very bottom of that 2008 crash, then sat frozen in fear, waiting for the world to feel safe again, missed the enormous recovery that came right afterward, and plenty of them locked in losses they never made back. One frightened afternoon, One panic decision and years of patient growth are simply gone. The market did not take that money from them. Their own fear did. This is why people who build real wealth so often repeat the same strange line, that the single biggest threat to your returns is not the economy and not the headlines. It is the face staring back at you in the mirror. People who build from nothing have constructed a kind of firewall between the news and their own hands. It is not that they feel no fear, they feel it and refuse to act on it. They decided in advance, back in the calm moments, what they would do when the storm arrived, so that the terrified version of themselves never gets to hold the steering wheel. That single act, a calm mind making the plan for a future panicked one, is one of the quietest superpowers in all of personal finance. The fourth pattern is a belief, and it sounds almost too simple to matter right up until you watch how it changes every decision that follows it. People who build wealth from nothing believe, all the way down, that they are the main cause of what happens to them. In that same survey of more than 10,000 millionaires, 93% said they built their wealth through hard work rather than a big salary or a lucky break. 93%. They did not credit the economy, their boss, their zip code, or their luck. They credited their own choices. Now that is not the entire truth about the world. Luck is real, circumstances are real, and some people start with a mountain to climb that others never have to face. But watch what that belief does to a person's behavior, whether or not it is perfectly fair. If you believe your financial future is mostly the result of forces outside your control, then saving feels pointless, planning feels naive, and the logical move is to spend today, because tomorrow is a coin flip anyway. But if you believe your own choices are the main lever, then every dollar becomes a decision that matters, and you start making those decisions on purpose. The belief creates the behavior, and the behavior creates the result. The wealth builder may not be completely right that they control everything. They are simply operating as if they control the part they actually can, which turns out to be far more than most people ever bother to use. There is a man worth introducing right here. Wendell spent his entire career as a maintenance worker, fixing boilers and patching roofs, never earning anything close to a large salary. When he passed away, the small town he lived in was stunned to learn he had quietly left behind a fortune large enough to fund scholarships for local kids for years to come. Nobody who knew Wendell would ever have guessed. But Wendell believed something the people around him mostly did not. He believed that the boring, invisible choices he made every single week were the thing actually building his life, so he kept making them, decade after decade, long after most people would have decided the whole effort was hopeless. That is what an internal sense of control really buys a person. Not certainty, and not any guarantee that everything works out in the end, but the willingness to keep planting seeds when you cannot yet see the tree. The person who believes their choices are the lever keeps pulling on it. The person who has decided it is all luck stops pulling long before the results would ever have shown up. And the genuinely cruel part is that the results almost always would have shown up. They simply needed more time than a discouraged person is ever willing to give them. If you are getting value from this, subscribe and stick around, because the next few patterns are the ones that quietly do the heaviest lifting, and I want you walking away with every single one of them. The fifth pattern is where psychology turns into design, and it is the piece that finally makes all the others sustainable. People who build wealth from nothing do not lean on willpower. They lean on systems that make willpower unnecessary in the first place. Self-discipline has a flaw that almost no one accounts for. It runs out. Every one of us wakes up with a limited tank of it, and by the end of a long, draining day, when the phone is buzzing and the online cart is already full, that tank is empty. If your financial plan depends on you making the right hard choice fresh every single day, you will eventually lose, because you are fighting your own exhausted brain every night for 30 years straight. The wealth builder knows this about themselves, so they do something clever. They make the decision one time, and then they remove themselves from the loop entirely. They set the money to move on its own. The day the paycheck lands, a fixed amount is automatically pulled into savings and investments before they ever lay eyes on it, before they can talk themselves into anything else. This is exactly why that same survey found that 8 out of 10 of these millionaires used their workplace 401k. It was not because they enjoyed paperwork. It was because a 401k does the saving for you. Straight out of the paycheck, on autopilot, whether you happen to feel motivated that month or not. The money is gone before temptation ever gets a vote. Notice how completely this flips the normal order of things. Most people spend first and then try to save whatever manages to survive until the end of the month, which is almost always nothing, because life quietly expands to swallow every dollar within reach. The wealth builder reverses the entire sequence. They save first, right off the top, and then live on whatever remains. Same paycheck, same bills, same life, but the order is inverted, and that one reversal is the whole difference between a savings account that fills up and one that never does. They are not more disciplined than you in the heat of the moment. They just refuse to let the moment get a vote. And there is a reason the top careers among these millionaires were so unglamorous. In that study, the 5 jobs that produced the most millionaires were engineer, accountant, teacher, manager, and attorney. Not one of them is a get-rich-quick profession. What they all share is a process-driven way of working. These are people who follow a system at their job all day long, and it turns out that people who trust systems at work tend to trust them with their money too. They do not white-knuckle their way to wealth. They build a quiet machine and then step out of its way. The 6th pattern is a reframe so complete that it changes what money even means to the person holding it. To most people, money is a tool for buying things. To the wealth builder, money is a tool for buying freedom, and those are 2 completely different games with completely different rules. When money is for things, every raise becomes a bigger apartment, a nicer car, a longer list of subscriptions, and the person ends up running faster and faster just to stay in the same spot. This is the trap that swallows high earners whole. There is a version of him everywhere. Call him Darius. Darius earns more than $200,000 a year and is, by any honest measure, broke. Every raise Darius has ever received was spent almost instantly on a lifestyle one notch above the last one. He has the big house and the new cars, and at the age of 45, he has almost nothing saved. Darius is not bad at math. He has just spent his whole life playing the game where money buys things, and that particular game has no finish line at all. The wealth builder is playing the other game entirely. When their income rises, their spending mostly does not, and the gap between those 2 numbers becomes the most valuable thing they own. That gap has a name. It is called margin, and margin is what actually buys freedom. Margin is the power to walk away from a job that is quietly destroying you. Margin is the reason a surprise car repair is a mild annoyance instead of a full-blown catastrophe. And this is where the contrast lands hardest. More than half of all Americans could not cover a surprise $1,000 expense from savings without reaching for debt, and nearly 1 in 4 have no emergency savings whatsoever. That is not really a math problem. It is the pure absence of margin. And margin is never built by earning more. It is built by keeping more, deliberately, month after month after month. And the numbers underneath this are genuinely sobering. When the Federal Reserve asked Americans whether they could handle a surprise $400 expense using cash, more than a third of them said they could not. Not 4,000. 400. That is the reality that a life without margin eventually produces no matter how large the paycheck grows. The wealth builder looks at that same fragile edge and simply refuses to live on it. They keep a cushion between themselves and disaster, not because they are fearful people, but because that cushion is exactly what allows them to stop being afraid. Margin is not only money sitting in an account, it is the quiet confidence of a person who knows that one bad week cannot end them, which leads straight into the seventh and final pattern, the one that quietly separates the people who merely talk about all of this from the people who actually do it. People who build wealth from nothing are not the least bit embarrassed by small beginnings. They start with amounts that most people would honestly laugh at. There is a psychological wall that stops almost everybody before they ever begin, and it sounds something like this. What is the point of saving $50? It will not change anything. So they wait. They wait until they earn more, until the debt is gone, until some imagined future version of their life finally feels ready. And that waiting is the entire tragedy, because every one of those small amounts they refused to start with was a seed, and the seeds were always the whole game. Money invested at around 10% roughly doubles about every 7 years. The $50 you wave off today becomes $100 in 7 years, $200 in 14, and it just keeps doubling, silently, in the dark, whether or not you ever believed in it. Watch what this same principle does with something as boring as a plain savings account. Right now, the average savings account in America pays about 1/3 of 1% a year, and the biggest banks often pay as little as 1/100th of 1% on $10,000. That works out to roughly one single dollar of interest for an entire year of your life. Meanwhile, an online high-yield savings account holding the exact same government-insured dollars pays around 4% right now, which turns that identical $10,000 into about $400 a year. Same money, same safety, 400 times the result. And the only real difference is that one person bothered to move it and the other person kept telling themselves it was too small to matter. This is the quiet edge hiding in plain sight for anyone willing to reach for it. It costs nothing extra, it carries no additional risk, and it is available to a person holding $10 just as much as a person holding $10,000. The wealth builder took that edge years ago and never thought about it again. Everyone else keeps meaning to get around to it someday, once the amount finally feels large enough to bother with. That is the whole psychology captured in a single moment. The wealth builder respects small numbers because they truly understand that small numbers are just large numbers that have not grown up yet. Everyone else keeps waiting for a number big enough to feel worth the effort, and that number somehow never arrives, because the growing was always supposed to happen during the exact years they spent standing around waiting for it. So look back across all 7 patterns, because notice what none of them required. Not a big salary, not a rich family, not a lucky break, a long clock instead of a short one, an identity that is not for sale, a steady nervous system in the middle of a storm, the quiet belief that your own choices are the lever, systems standing in for willpower, money treated as freedom rather than as stuff, and a genuine respect for small beginnings. Every one of those is a way of thinking, which means every single one of them can be learned, starting today, at whatever income you happen to have right now. And that is the real reason so few people ever build wealth from nothing. It was never that the information was locked away in a vault somewhere. It is that almost none of us were ever actually taught how money behaves. We were handed adult lives and quietly expected to run these 7 mental programs, having never once been shown that they even exist. The encouraging part is that the exact lessons school left out, the ones that silently decide who ends up free and who ends up trapped, can be picked up at any age you happen to be right now. And the money lessons that school never taught you are exactly where this whole thing truly begins. Before you go, I genuinely want to hear from you. Which of these 7 patterns do you already run without even realizing it? And which one hit a nerve because you know, deep down, it is the one you have been avoiding? And if there was ever a single moment when the way you think about money changed for good, tell me what it was and what it cost you to learn it. Someone reading your comment is standing right now exactly where you used to stand. And your story might be the one thing that finally gets them to start.